Hello, my name is Jennifer Moorhead, and our team's case study discusses the dispute between Native Americans and the Washington Redskins over the usage of their controversial name. Eduardo Paz will introduce the first section, discussing the organization. David Pope will introduce the second section, discussing the organizational theories that can be applied to the Washington football team and their public relationship with the Native Americans. Crystal Munson will introduce the third section, discussing the problem and how the team handled it. And I will introduce the last section, discussing what organizational theories can be applied to better understand the problem.
For the first section of the presentation, we will talk about the organization. The Washington football team, formerly known as the Washington Redskins, is a professional football team of Washington, D.C. The team competes in the NFL, and according to the Pro Football Reference, the team has played more than 1,000 games and has a record of 600 wins. They have also won 3 of their 5 participations on the Super Bowl. In this section, we will discuss the team's history, some controversies that follow the team, the changes of ownership they had, and its organization structure. To talk about the history of the Washington Redskins, we need to know who George Preston Marshall is. George Preston Marshall is considered the man who influenced professional football to become America's favorite sport. In 1932, the DC businessman bought a football franchise of Boston called the Braves. The name of the team was inspired by the baseball team with the same name because both teams share the same stadium, Braves Field. After the purchase, Marshall got entry into the NFL. The fun fact is that during the time, the league required 2 payments. One was a $1,500 fee, and the other one was a $1,500 guarantee of the team's completion of their first season in Boston. Marshall never paid either fee. During those years, the NFL was struggling to survive and needed owners with capital and vision. Marshall was just the man. But having the same name as a baseball team was confusing. After a year from the team's acquisition, Marshall renamed the team to the Boston Redskins. In 1937, Marshall relocated the team to Washington, D.C., changing the name again to the Washington Redskins. It was Marshall's wife, Corinne Griffith, who suggested moving the team to their hometown. She always told George that Washington, D.C. was an excellent market for professional football because people were always looking for something to do on their weekends. Marshall was bent on keeping an all-white team. The Redskins were the only one of the 14 NFL teams not to hire Black players. Interior Secretary Stuart Udall changed this. He told Marshall that a 30-year lease of the federally owned DC Stadium was going to be revoked unless he added a Black player. Marshall was the last NFL owner to integrate his franchise in 1961. Finally, in 1962, Bobby Mitchell became Washington's first Black player. By 1963, Marshall was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame and became part of the Redskins Ring of Fame. Sadly, it was the same year that his health started deteriorating. Marshall then decided to give 5% to prominent attorney Edward Bennett Williams to run the team. Marshall's death at age 72 in August 1969 saw Jack Kent Cooke buying majority control of the Washington Redskins. On May 25, 1999, Daniel Snyder, the team's current owner, purchased the Redskins. Snyder said he had no intention of changing the team name. So why do you think Snyder made this statement? The Redskins name and logo have caused tremendous controversy during the team's history, with many people criticizing it as offensive to Native Americans. In 1972, Native American leaders met with Redskins president Edward Bennett Williams to change the team's name, which they said was the derogatory racial epithet. Protests of more than 2,000 Native Americans continued again in 1992 to the team owner, Jack Kent Cooke, and again in 2006 to Daniel Snyder. In 2013, Snyder made the statement, "We will never change the name. It's that simple. Never. You can use caps." On June 19, 2020, following the George Floyd protest, Events DC, which is in charge of the RFK Stadium, removed George Preston Marshall's statue. A week later, the Redskins removed his name from the Ring of Fame. On July 2, 2020, FedEx called on the team to change its name. Due to increasing pressure from corporate sponsors, the team finally announced it was retiring the Redskins name and temporarily play as the Washington Football Team and reveal a replacement name later. In addition to Washington Football Team players, the organization includes current owner Daniel Snyder, Bruce Allen, which is the general manager, and his role is wide-ranging, but he's vital in creating the bridge between the coaching and scouting. Mike Shanahan holds the title of Vice President of Football Operations, and he has control over all football decisions. Both Allen and Shanahan report to Snyder. Other front office notables are the Director of Player Personnel, Scott Campbell, and the Director of Pro Personnel, Morocco Brown. They both are Shanahan's eyes and ears while coaching. After the retirement of the Redskins name, the Washington Football Team is committed on a new beginning and the creation of a new identity, gathering fans, players, community leaders, and critical members of the organization to write a new legacy that will represent the future and vision of the team.
This section will define and discuss the organizational theories that apply to the Washington Football Team and their public relationship with Native Americans. These theories will address the Washington Football Team's decade of decisions to preserve and protect their controversial name. The first organizational approach is the theory of human relations. Sociologist George Elton Mayo founded the human relations movement in the 1930s following a series of experiments known as the Hawthorne studies. These studies focused on examining the link between employees' well-being and workplace productivity. The results of Mayo's Hawthorne studies showed that the relationships are most influential factors in productivity. The researchers realized productivity increased due to the relationship and supportive groups where each employee was significantly affected the team output. As a side result, the attention the workers received from the researchers increased their motivation and productivity. Based on the Hawthorne studies data, Mayo proposed that employees aren't motivated by pay and environmental factors. Instead, positive relational factors play a more meaningful role in productivity. Mayo's created this matrix to show productivity change in different situations. You can think of a group cohesiveness as being how well the group gets on and their camaraderie. We can think of norms as being whether a group encourages positive or negative behaviors. At this time, Taylorism, or the application of science in the workplace to improve productivity, viewed individuals as machines that could work in unethical or unrealistic environments. Mayo, in contrast, proposed that the idea of the social person, meaning situations should treat people as individuals and not machines. They are humans with individual needs. Human relation theory was born out of the Great Depression and World War II. Due to these events, a surplus of labor filled the marketplace. Businesses and manufacturers knew jobs were rare and hard to come by. Inhumane labor environments led to the need for organized labor advocates and unions. Unions rejected the scientific management status quo and argued that the workers are not machines and should not be treated as one. For more than 2 decades, Washington Redskin owner Daniel Snyder fiercely resisted calls to change the name of his team, despite protests that the name is offensive to Native Americans. Daniel's leadership failed to recognize the opposing principles he cast into the workplace. The Redskins name is an artifact of history and no longer serves the team and its community. Snyder did not share in the same progressive vision as many NFL teams. He neglected to recognize that his leadership sets a precedent and a tone for the human relationships within his organization. The public climate he held on to created a morally complicated workplace for his employees and stakeholders. He neglected to understand the values and principles he established and how they were not shared throughout the entire team. And ultimately, he did not represent his stakeholders' promises. The second organizational theory we will discuss is human resource theory. This is a departure from the human relations model in the way that it does not focus on the individual, but aims to look at the organization's untapped resources as a whole. This theory uses employees' effectiveness and efficiency to achieve the organizational goal. In this model, the manager does not share information, discusses department decisions, or encourages self-direction or self-control merely to improve subordinate satisfaction and morale. This theory intends to address and focus the organization's purposes and goals. Organizations must establish proper human resource practices and policies to facilitate their employees' continuous learning processes by providing them a flexible environment. Any organization's success depends on their ability to learn and its ability to achieve its design goals. This model implies that control is often most effectively exercised by those directly involved in the work process, rather than someone who's removed in the group from the actual point of operation. Moreover, the human resources model does not suggest that managers allow participation only through routine decisions. Instead, it implies that the more critical the decision, the greater the obligation is to encourage its subordinates with ideas and suggestions. Early in 2020, the Washington Post shared an inside story about the failing relationship between the Washington football team and its corporate sponsor, FedEx. A 2-page letter was sent to the front office of the Redskins from the general counsel of FedEx. The shipping giant warned Daniel Snyder that they would remove funding and its signage from the Washington football stadium. The FedEx counsel pointed the harmful risks that the team's branding and its inconsistency with the team's commitment for a more inclusive society. Snyder failed to consider the values of his corporate stakeholders. It was finally a financial threat that eventually forced Snyder to cave. His organization was unable to understand the human resources of his organization. Due to its branding, the Redskins neglected the obligations it promised to its stakeholders, team members, and customers.
In this section, I'll be discussing the problem and who faced it. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine that the name you've been called your whole life is no longer your name. It's now Taylor. Your friend calls. Hey, Taylor, want to meet up for coffee? You call to make a doctor's appointment. Name and date of birth? You reply, Taylor, followed by your date of birth. Now, imagine going through the rest of your life as Taylor. If your name was changed today, how would that affect your sense of self, your identity, your relationships, your life experiences? When it comes to defining who you are as a person, how much weight does your name carry? On July 13 of last year, after 87 years of being the Washington Redskins, the team became the Washington football team. Since then, the team and its name have been in a state of limbo as they await a new name or hear that they will, from this point on, be the Washington football team. Can a storied history and tradition remain intact if the defining noun is changed? During the 87 years that the team was known as the Redskins, they moved from Boston to Washington, won 3 Super Bowl titles, lived through 1 World War, and 14 US presidents. Some fans feel that on the day the team dropped their Redskins name, their storied history and traditions were dropped as well. But does a different name really erase the past, change tradition, or rewrite history? The team's name has been a hot topic for years, and even with their new name, the team is engulfed in continuous controversy and debate. Not just in terms of their name, but in the boardroom, with their sponsors, and of course amongst their fans. 20 years ago, when Dan Snyder, the team's owner, was asked for his thoughts about changing the Redskins name, and if he found it derogatory towards Native Americans, he responded, "Number one, we are never going to change the name of the Redskins. From a bottom line perspective, what it means is tradition, competitiveness, and honor. It's not meant to be derogatory. That was 20 years ago. From 2001 to 2020, the team name shifted from a heated debate to latent, often depending on societal circumstances. Corporate sponsors had been publicly pressuring Snyder to change the Washington football team's name for quite some time, but the turning point came on July 2nd of 2020, when FedEx, the franchise's main sponsor, released a statement asking the team to change its name. They followed up their request by sending a letter to the team's owners stating that if Snyder refused to change the team's name, they would terminate their naming rights and not pay the rest of their $45 million contract. Other sponsors, including Pepsi, Nike, and Bank of America, made similar demands. The process of a professional sports team changing its name is complicated, and Washington faced a challenge in implementing the Washington football team name before its season opening game on September 13 of 2020. Not only did the team need to make new helmets and uniforms, but it also had to pull the Redskins name from signs at multiple facilities and revise a 500-page media guide that had been sent to the printers. Even the club's address had to be altered. In August of 2020, the Washington football team opened idea submissions for a name, logo, or video testimonial. When submissions closed on April 5, the team had received over 15,000 suggestions. Jason Wright, the team's president, feels that it's essential for the team's fan base to think that the name change is a continuation of something rather than the start of something new. The rebranding goes beyond just the new name and logo. It extends to the game day experience. The cheer team has become co-ed, and the marching band received new uniforms as well. The team is utilizing several methods in its attempt to land on a new name. Along with marketing, testing, and analysis, they planned focus groups and a series called Making the Brand to take fans inside the process. The franchise seems to be taking its time deciding what they want to do. There's no established timeline, but Jason Wright has said there's a chance they could announce a new name before the end of the 2021 season. The team's fans would prefer sooner rather than later, but the franchise is having difficulties committing to a timeline because they feel that it's more important to be thorough and inclusive of all parties than to make a rushed decision. Once the team considers their name permanent and trademark issues are settled, Washington can design a new logo, color scheme, and uniform design. It seems for now, and at least through 2021, the Washington football team will remain the Washington football team. It's not the most creative name, or is it? There are no other professional sports teams out there with a bluntly obvious name, making it unique. Although the same team seems to have put the Redskins name controversy behind them, the "what now" debate has replaced it. Ever since the teams shed their Redskin identity, it's waited in limbo. Perhaps that's a good thing. It gives the franchise a chance to form an identity without ties to a name, bringing it back to the basics and allowing them to define themselves by the way they play ball. Is that possible? No politics, no controversy, just good old-fashioned football? Probably not. Politics and controversy will always play a role in organizations. But if the players can stay focused and play well, that will be their defining characteristic. Seems like a touchdown to me.
In this section, we'll look at what organizational communication theories can be applied to help understand the problem. First, let's do a brief recap of history surrounding the dispute over the Redskins name. Former owner George Preston Marshall, pictured on the right, changed the name from the Braves to the Redskins in 1933, some suspect inspired by his Indian head coach. After prior requests for the team to change the name, Native Americans protested the Super Bowl in 1992. After years of trademark battles over the name, the Black Lives Matter movement in early 2020 shed new light on racial struggles and put pressure on major stakeholders, leading to the retiring of the Redskins name on July 13th of the same year. Cultural organizational theories can be applied to better understand the struggle and disagreements over the Redskins name. In this case, culture refers to the routines, stories, values, and metaphors and symbols that guide an organization. Sometimes, within a culture, there can be fragmentation or ambiguity. Now, while ambiguity can serve to promote diversity and dialogue, it can also be a roadblock to unity and determining consistent values. In the case of the Washington Redskins name, there was much ambiguity about its offensive nature, which was often perpetuated by those in positions of power. Most notably, in 2016, the Washington Post released a poll claiming that 9 out of 10 Native Americans were not offended by the Redskins name. Responses to the poll were quick to point out that the participants were people who self-identified as Native American without verification. This disconnect fueled the historical discourse between the team's management and Native Americans who fought to have the name discontinued. Another perspective related to cultural studies is integration. Integrated cultures favor monologue over dialogue and emphasize clarity of values. One such organization that exemplifies cultural integration is Apple, led by Steve Jobs. Apple is well known for their clarity of vision and consistent values. Now, as Native Americans fought the Redskins name, the cultural ambiguity surrounding the usage of Native American words and images began to dissipate. From 1969 to present day, college teams started to acknowledge the impact of their names on Native culture and subsequently updated them. Teams such as the Midwestern State University Indians in Texas, which became the Mustangs, noted their decision as a desire to eliminate the potential for a hostile or abusive environment. Fast forward to spring of 2020 and the murder of George Floyd, which ignited the Black Lives Matter movement. The cultural climate surrounding racial justice experienced an awakening years in the making. Major stakeholder for the Washington Redskins, such as FedEx, who held the stadium naming rights, put pressure on the team to change their name by threatening to remove the team signage. Finally, on July 13, 2020, Dan Snyder, the current team owner, announced the resignation of the Redskins name. To conclude, the historical ambiguity about the perception of the offensive nature of Native American themes in sports gradually shifted to integration with the rise of cultural awareness. Through an integration of POC cultures, major sporting organizations were forced to adapt their symbols and values to better align with Native American culture. That concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time.